Okay, everybody, and here we are on Facebook Live. Our topic for today is whiteness, and I have a wonderful group of amazing people from around the world. We will be talking together about what whiteness means to each of us, and especially to them, since I am not white. You do know that, right? I'm not white. Okay, Justine, let's have that link, please. Okay, so what we wanted to do with this, have any of you seen this? Trevor Noah tweeted, and he basically said, this is when white people go too far to be an ally with black people. So I'm coming to you, Uncle Ronnie. Before we show your clip on your reading and you tell us about your upbringing, what do you think about that? What do you think about what Noah said?
He's absolutely right. That was OTT, over the top. You know, I've been a single white boy on so many occasions amongst a whole crowd of African black people in guerrilla forests in Angola and Mozambique, training in the then Soviet Union, 200 of us, the one white boy, and in these guerrilla camps where I was then a lecturer in politics. And you know, when you're together with people, you forget color. I forgot my color, they forgot my color. You just become part of people. But you have to have that way of linking with people and forgetting aspects of hang-ups in the past. Because of course I was born in South Africa as a very privileged, it was a lower middle class home, but any white person, as we well know, had privileges that went with it. So I don't want to take up too much time.
We want to show your clip, Uncle Ronnie. We want to show your clip. We've got your recording, so we'd like to show that, and then we'll have you talk about growing up in South Africa at that period.
Okay, sure.
Can we listen to the clip, please?
I'm going to read from a point when I'm a 7-year-old, growing up in Johannesburg. It's 1946, and my dear mother has taken me for a treat to a downtown cinema. It's there where we witnessed a horrific scene of white thugs beating up a black man because he refused to get out of their way on the pavement. And I asked my mother, are black people being treated the way we Jews were treated in Germany? I had seen the gruesome scenes on the overseas newsreels in the cinemas, despite my mother pushing me below my seat to obscure my view. I managed to peer between the seats and see on the screen images of emaciated victims in the concentration camps and the piles of corpses. I see my mother's dear face, her pensive expression, her eyes closed in thought, searching for what to say. Ronald. The words come out slow and clear. People were starved to death in those concentration camps and thrown into the gas chambers. It's not like that here, but, and there is a long pause, it starts with the bad things we often see here and the way Black people are spoken to, cursed with horrible language by our neighbors and beaten in the streets, like we saw that man being beaten the other day. That's how it starts. We must be kind to people. We must speak politely, and we must treat others as we would like them to treat us. She stares into my eyes, reaching deep into me to be sure I understand.
Thank you, Uncle Ronnie. So you have had such a immense, whether you talk about being, you know, in the guerrilla camps, and then this particular book, which is your latest, about just reflecting on your growing up. So I think there's just this real wave of different kinds of experiences that you have had. But tell us about growing up in apartheid South Africa.
Well, you know, like Germans would say about what happened to the Jews in the time of Hitler, they didn't know. And what do whites say about South Africa? Oh, we were never a part of the apartheid system. We didn't know. But there was the 7-year-old child who could see and hear, and it was evident. I think so much in life depends not on some inner angelic genius, all that crap. I was very lucky to have a kind mother who just taught me that cardinal question about respect for others. And then I was lucky enough to meet people in my life, growing up as a teenager, seeing despicable things happening, but enjoying life as well, sports, girls, and all the fun things. But by the time I was ending the teenage period, things were getting very rough and serious in South Africa. I had crossed the color line and had Black friends, which was very, very unusual. And it's my mother who gave me that start in life, quite frankly. And then Sharpeville occurred, and I felt I really had to now act and do something. And I was lucky that a cousin of mine, much older than me, 20 years or so, had been arrested. She was in the Communist Party, and she was a treason trialist with Mandela. And she lived, I was in Joburg, she lived in Durban. And I thought, I've got to do something. So where's this ANC? Where's the Communist Party? They were all banned, in prison, on the run. And I made a beeline for her. And through her and that contact, I had the opportunity. And then that was a specific thing. That was me choosing, because I could have chosen to sympathize and go away, or to take the plunge and become involved. And something in me, the rebel in me, the upbringing, led me to take the plunge at the age of 20, thereabouts, time of Sharpeville, 1960, and my life changed totally. From then on, I was involved. I don't want to go on too long, but my whole life was then spent in the struggle until we got freedom. The one thing I did want to say, because there's also a levity factor, I was in exile quite some time back in South Africa, and Nelson Mandela brought a few of us whites from the movement together to meet a group of white business people. And he introduced me to this group of about a dozen whites who regarded me as some terrorist who would have horns out of my head. And he said, I want you to now meet Ronnie Casseroles. This man has got a black heart. So to whites, a black heart, my God, this is a vampire. To an African, to the African,
That's
the black
interesting.
heart was, he's got the heart of a black
Yes.
man.
Wow.
And I could see these whites looking at
That's a
additional
lovely
horror
point
at
to
me.
stop at. Yes.
Yeah.
Madeline.
So look,
because
just from that whole background, I think you take your choices in life and you become involved, and where it's life and death stuff, where you're called upon to stand with other people, you take that choice. Nick Borain's from South Africa. He was involved here, his family, etc. The Black Lives Matter. It's been wonderful to see on the screens that diversity of people in the United States together. And that's my very optimistic approach. That join with people who are struggling for justice and you become accepted.
Thanks, Uncle Ronnie. Madeline, I liked the link in terms of our conversation was about parenting and parents and the influence of your dad in your life, but also, as you said, the environment around you. We will show as you talk. Justine will pull up some of the pictures. You don't have to talk to the pictures, but we just want to show the slides of your dad and the kind of work that he did. So welcome, Madeline.
Well, thank you very much for those. And much like, I hope I can call you Uncle Ronnie as well.
Yeah, sure, please do.
Uncle Ronnie, I also got my start in life from my parents, particularly from my father. And I think I was invited to this panel by Firdoz largely because she cited a Facebook post that my sister and I had written on Father's Day, where we wanted to honor my father and to his larger legacy in his fight for civil rights, his activism, and using his voice against racial discrimination. I think my father, in particular, really opened my world and influenced the choices in my life, be it in human rights, be it the work I did on Argentina to compile a list of the disappeared with a team of colleagues and compañeros, my career as a journalist, working with Interpress Service, a third world news agency, and of course working with UNICEF for many years on the rights of children everywhere and in every circumstance, particularly in emergencies. I have very vivid memories and early memories of my father's influence, and some of those memories really affected my early life. In 1963, when I was basically 11, my father came back from a freedom ride in Maryland, and he had gone down as part of a biracial group to the south of the United States to challenge segregation by riding interstate buses. And together with Black and white members of unions and civil rights organizations, they gathered to basically integrate an amusement park, and they were met with violence. And the group of what we would say today right-wing men and women started yelling at my father, calling him a nigger lover and a communist. And I remember those conversations around the dinner table. But if those stories weren't enough, also me and my sister were directly threatened because my father had co-founded the Great Neck Equal Housing Committee to support Black families to own houses in Long Island suburbs. And we were told not to answer the phone because there were threatening messages coming over the phone where they would basically say that if my father continued to support Black families to come into our community, my sister and I might not return from school. So that was obviously quite frightening for me, and I was quite young. And not surprisingly, the African-American family decided not to purchase a house in the town because it became too threatening. Both my parents, though, were firm supporters of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which you will probably remember, Uncle Ronnie.
Sure, sure.
In the 1960s, from student-led sit-ins at segregated lunch counters. And these students had come up for a little bit of R&R and also for health checkups. They had come up north. And I went with my father and my mother to visit them. And, you know, I was a kid, I was a tomboy. And so I started running after one of these, you know, who seemed like an adult, but he was only probably 15 or 16. His name was John. And I ran after him trying to catch him. And he looked at me and he said, "Little girl, if the hoses and the dogs cannot catch me down in Mississippi, neither." So, you know, these were bigger moments of, I think, really awareness, particularly that, you know, that people could set dogs on other people. You know, it was very frightening to me. And of course, my parents had to explain what that all meant. Did my upbringing have an effect on me? Well, certainly, because my parents were very important role models. And as I had said to Ferdows, early and healthy education makes a huge difference in how one perceives the world, but also how one perceives oneself in the world. And I had, Ferdows, do you have that slide of that picture of Claudine?
I don't know if Justine found it because she thought did you send it to me on WhatsApp or did you send it on an email? Because we couldn't find it earlier.
I sent it on email. I had selected the cover billboard picture
Did you find that one?
of Claudine, of the advertisement for Claudine, which was a film in the 1970s that my father had co-produced. And it was probably the first time that they had a movie that had an all Black cast. And it starred Diane Carroll.
Yes, it's on this clip. On
So
the
I
pic.
wanted to mention that because I think role models are so important in young lives. But, you know, also the importance of, you know, learning to embrace diversity, listening to others. You know, in my life and my work, it's been being able to project from a certain perspective the lives of others. And I think you do learn that from not only your parental upbringing, but also, you know, your education and your culture. And, you know, very often that culture can also have negative effects as well as positive effects. And as I was mentioning to Ferdows, you know, I'm all too aware that as humans, we have, you know, that capacity to separate and distinguish, and that we all carry prejudices. And I think that it's the awareness and re-examination that we're seeing right now in the United States that is definitely a necessary prerequisite to reset racist thoughts and actions. But, you know, the reality is that awareness alone is not sufficient.
Yes.
The trouble is deeper than we think, because racism, you know, as I was listening to a commentator say, and I thought this was a very important statement. He said, racism is not just a binary problem of Black and white, but of classism and the system. So I'm going to leave you with that thought, because I think that's something that we all have to think about.
Yes.
lives and lives of children.
Thank you, Madeline. Justine, do we have the next clip? Justine? Yes. So I'd like us to listen to this, considering what both Madeline and Uncle Ronnie had to say. And we're coming into you, Josh.
Thing that white people can do, or non-POC people, actually any human being on the planet could do right now, is to just say, of course I'm racist. Is to just say, of course I'm racist. If you grew up in a house that spoke French and you, as a baby, just started laying in your crib, listening to people speak French over you, you wouldn't have to do anything to start gaining proficiency in the French language. You would just speak it because that's what's being spoken around you. Our society speaks racism. It has spoken racism since we were born. Of course you are racist. Of course. The idea that somehow this blanket of ideas has fallen on everyone's head except for yours is magical thinking. It's useless. Because what happens when I say, of course I'm racist, is what it does is it says, oh, this is not a personal or a moral failing. This is not because I'm a bad person. This is not because I'm some evil, terrible being. This is because that is the structure of this society that I've been immersed in since the beginning of my life. And what I have the opportunity to do is to learn a new language. The same way someone who grows up speaking French can decide to learn a new language. But that takes work. It takes effort. And that's the difference between non-racist and anti-racist. Anti-racist is about action. That to do nothing is to leave the system firmly in place. It is to absolutely affirm the status quo of certain bodies being allowed resource access opportunities and other bodies being literally killed. So if you want to assure that racism stands, continue being non-racist. But if you would like to see racism dissolve, if you would like to see the interruption of racism, the interruption of white supremacy, then what you'll do is say, where do I speak French? And how do I translate that to a language that is less harmful? I think we all have the opportunity to do that right now.
Great.
Thank you. So Josh, this is you and Zureida. And I think, it's almost simplified because we're saying, you're in a house of French-speaking people, so you will pick up French. I would like to come to you, Zureida, in terms of you being in this, bringing up these children in your home, which is a mixed-race home. What do they pick up? And then before we get to Josh, we want to show his amazing little clips before that. But let's start with Zureida.
What do our kids pick up? I think it's so different to the households where you do grow up. Like myself, for example, that spoke French. My kids are not having that experience where their two parents are speaking French. And they're also not having that experience at school. They're very much immersed in a multiracial culture in terms of their schooling. I think what's concerning for me more than ever is the classism that we need to make them aware of. Not that much racism, because their exposure since the time they've been, Josh comes from the most incredibly diverse family in terms of, race, religion, gender. The Lindberghs have it all. Or the Silvers rather. So my kids have been exposed to that, gay relationships, adopted children, Black children. So this has been their norm since they were born. The thing for me is to impart on them the awareness of classism, because I think that in itself is just as detrimental and painful as racism.
Yeah, for us, that's really, really important. This otherness, all of these others, racism and classism and your sexuality, anything that divides us needs to be spoken about as well in this conversation, not just this conversation we're having tonight, in the conversation. So
I would, before you continue, Josh, I would like us to just look at the clip of your work. And I'm so incredibly proud of you and what you have achieved, and coming from the home that you come from. So I want you to contextualize that. But let us just look at the clip of your amazing work, and then you can go on from there.
Okay.
Wow. So Josh, well done. I want you to contextualize that. That's the world you come from. I mean, I said to somebody the other day, we are all on earth where we all wear drama school, and somehow Nick, he went to the stars where he belongs, eh, Josh? So tell us about that and your upbringing in this really fascinating family. And then as Zuraidah says, that adds to what your children would have experienced.
Well, I think of my privilege actually as being that, born into that family of Des and Dawn Lindbergh, where they were literally, I was born in 1971, and so they were fighting the South African government for multiracial theatres as the building and multiracial people on stage telling the story. And to be literally born into that fight was a great, great privilege. And of course, then mixing with the people that were literally rehearsing those shows on our lawns in my house, while security police apparently stayed down the driveway. So then I got to mix with people of all colors, races, religions, creeds, and the list goes on of that otherness. But of course, my privilege, you know, I must acknowledge, was also being born as a white male in 1971, Johannesburg, South Africa. And so that being born into that privilege and very diverse background means I must now, even although I'm born into that I must still continue this conversation. And yes, the world is having that now, and I think that is significant that in different parts of the world we can have this conversation, perhaps relating to different specifics that we need to have it in our country. But for me personally, I've had to engage with a lot of my friends and with myself to ask that question as well. So yes, a great privilege and to be born into that, but that conversation continues. South Africa, we had a formalized version of this conversation. A lot of countries didn't. Our Truth Commission did a lot of good in that public forum to have this conversation. And I think that conversation as a country needs to continue as well. I think one of the most beautiful things about marrying Zuraidah is that when we met, it was, you know, when you fall in love with someone, you meet the person and fall in love with that person for who they are. And because you might come from different backgrounds, it makes it a very honest relationship. You might have family members, extended families and so on that need to adjust to this or might question it or whatever it may be. And even people we've never met before because, you know, we happen to be in a public profession that start questioning it. And then you sit back and you go, well, this is us, this is our connection, and this is who we are. Then people perhaps get to know that, and that change is made within the families and so on. And so our kids just are born into that, like you guys were talking about just now, but then then they still carry that forward as a mixed race couple into their situations and dynamics in their schools and so on. You know, they proudly mixed race in that way. We talk to them about that, to own that as well, and that's a really nice thing to carry for them. The way we've seen our relationship as a couple have an effect on people and things is great. In my work, it should just be about telling the story. It's, you know, it's great that you showed that clip. Thank you. I'm very proud of that work, but it is about trying to move an audience. So then you have to, what is the story we're trying to tell? And right now, as a storyteller or an artist, things are quite challenging in South Africa. There's certain rules and regulations in terms of trying to readdress the past or trying to, you know, transform things. I want to engage in that conversation rather than butt up against it, because I happen to be a nearly 50-year-old white male and so on, so you might get pushed aside, but rather I have something to contribute. So let me listen, not just about my whiteness and this change that this world is experiencing right now. And let me learn about that, so my stories perhaps will change, and the way I create a story, or what I can offer in this discussion of transformation and readdressing some of these things. So that conversation, I think, is quite important there too, in terms of work and the upbringing, you know, that I had. I was very proud of my parents' question.
What was wonderful, thanks Josh, was that, you know, I think in fact the show was prompted by you, this particular episode, because you reached out to me and you said, you know, what can we do? We're in COVID, things are difficult. And I challenged you being white, and we said, let's talk about whiteness. And so I want to thank you, because I think it was so important. And we look up to people like Uncle Ronnie, who has this vast experience and is able to put it together very easily, and then Madeline as well. But Nico, I want to come to you, because we met, I think, as I was preparing for the World Summit on Media for Children, and you was at Ohio University, 2006, 2007, round about then. And I watched on television, well, on Facebook, I watched on Facebook as you were trying to adopt, and that process, which you in fact call the F show as well. And I was fascinated by that whole, you know, the struggles you had. But I also understood that you came from a different place, and there was a different interpretation, a different depth that I wanted to engage with. So I thank you for joining us. And can we show the clip first before going into the conversation, or would you like to speak first?
Oh, sure, go right ahead.
Okay, Justin, let's show the clip.
Yay! Yesterday at 9:20 a.m., we legally adopted this child 8 months after becoming his foster parents. This child is pure joy, and our hearts are bursting.
As white parents of a mixed race, Black and Filipino boy, we're hoping that you'll help hold us accountable to a few things.
We will continue to do the work of acknowledging our own white privilege. We will not assume that you are cloaked in this privilege just because we are raising you. We will continue to speak out against white supremacy. We will continue to fight for racial justice and to push ourselves to do more.
We'll also work to create a community that you can see yourself reflected in, and to find teachers, coaches, and mentors that look like you.
Thanks. And we have a special guest. My wife happens to be home, so she's sitting in. This is Kristen.
I got onto the link and I couldn't stop. I watched all the episodes.
Hey.
And it was 3 o'clock in the morning and I was crying and I just wanted to see more. Thank you. Talk to us about this.
Thanks for thanks for having us. This is a fascinating group of people you brought together. I'm really enjoying it. You know, the first film I ever made was actually also about transracial adoption. It's about a young Black woman in Brooklyn who's adopted and raised by 2 white women. And I was in my 20s when I made that. So then fast forward till, I guess, my mid-30s, now married, living in Oakland. And, you know, we wanted to have a kid, but neither of us had any interest in getting pregnant or experiencing, you know, morning sickness or any of that. So, you know, and frankly, like my genes aren't amazing. So we were just kind of like, let's adopt. This feels right. I'd always been interested in adoption. Kristen had also always been interested in adoption. Are you crying at your own scene?
Oh.
I hadn't seen that for years.
I'm mainly crying at how little our kid was in that scene.
Yeah, he was so tiny. He's big now. He's almost 4. You know, so we started working with an agency and initially as foster parents, and we fostered our boy for 8 months before adopting him, and he's Black and Filipino. And so I'm so glad that you showed that Sonia Renee Taylor clip. She's an amazing teacher, mentor, and it really connects with what I have to say, because I'll first say that I think there's always a little bit of a danger when you get a bunch of white people together. Not everybody here is white, but to talk about racism, that everybody's going to try to, like, you know, be the most anti-racist person in the room, like the woke Olympics and all that nonsense. So let me just be very clear that until pretty recently, I had thought I was a pretty good anti-racist because I'd been thinking about race critically for, you know, a decade or more. My films tend to revolve around race. I show up at Black Lives Matter protests and, you know, donate to the right organizations. And what I've realized, and frankly, and a little bit shamefully, it didn't happen until our child came into my life. But these things don't make you a great person. They make you maybe a little bit less of a monster as a white person. And until you accept that, if you're white, you are directly benefiting from white supremacy, and that to be truly anti-racist, you have to decenter yourself and you have to give things up and you have to, you know, let go of a lot of comforts, then you're really not doing anti-racism. And it's been a real journey to sort of realize that, discover that for myself. I think, you know, you absolutely have to start. Step one is looking at your own implicit biases, looking, you know, at your own inner racism and working to dismantle that. And that is ongoing work that never ends. That's daily work. But yeah, you also have to get activated. It's not a passive existence being anti-racist. And you know, so this moment that we're in, clearly here in the United States, but also globally, it seems, from the way the protests have been all over the world, has been so important in underscoring that and in helping us along with our own journey.
Thank you very much for sharing that. And I left that so that we could come into you, Nick and Louise, because you are white parents who have adopted a Black South African child. And when I watched that, I was like, I have to connect you guys. You have to see this and you have to know each other. So Nick, I'm going to start with you because I suppose the little story between Nick and myself is that since drama school, Nick and I would do some kind of theater, right, Nick? Whether it's just sudden performances, we needed to make money, we went to people and things happened. So I sent Nick an email about 5 minutes ago and said, Nick, I'd like you to read something for me. And he's like, oh, okay, I know what you want. So thank you, Nick. Can you do that? And then we'll go into it.
Sure. I'm just reading something that Firdaus sent me from an article on what is whiteness. And this is just a little piece of it. While one can be proud of one's German heritage, French Canadian culture, American nationality, or African American ethnicity, one should not be proud of one's whiteness. Whiteness is a forced group membership that originated by oppressing people of color. And it causes psychological and spiritual damage to white people just as it damages non-whites. White Americans are imbued with whiteness from infancy. They do not choose it for themselves. People who look white and who have immigrated to America, us, are generally afforded whiteness upon arrival, whether they want it or not. You may have heard the term white guilt. Many white people are reluctant to define or even discuss whiteness due to the unpleasant feelings it can invoke of guilt and shame. That's from D'Angelo. Shame is particularly toxic emotion due to the lengths at which people will go to avoid this feeling, which typically includes blame shifting, aggression, and other forms of hostility. It may also lead to self-harm or to atone for wrongs done or other dysfunctional behaviors to distract from the weight of the shame. This is why it feels so uncomfortable when white nationalists talk about white pride. For most of us, it just doesn't seem right, continuing to accept unjust benefits that ultimately come at the expense of others is antisocial and unethical. It causes the beneficiaries, white Americans in this case, to have a stake in not acknowledging, seeing, or changing the problematic status quo. Upton Sinclair famously said, "It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it." So that was just, yeah, that was just a clip that Fado sent me, but it's incredibly apt. I'll just sort of segue into sort of me, and then Lou can take over. I obviously come from South Africa, raised in a very progressive family, very much part of the whole Truth and Reconciliation Commission because of what my father did. And then I spent a large section of time developing a story around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission with a group of diverse South Africans, black and white. We then took that all over the world, and so discussing the role of forgiveness and of reconciliation. What does that mean in post-conflict environments? So we were in Rwanda, in Bosnia, in Cambodia. We came and performed the play in the United States as well. And then an opportunity came up to come to the United States, and we took it. And I think rather naively, believing that bringing our daughter here was a good idea in terms of multiculturalism, we kind of fell for the whole Obama legacy idea. Which just simply wasn't true. It was sort of a very, very, very thin veneer. And we arrived in America, and the experience for our daughter was pretty radical. And over the last 2 years, we joined an organization called PACT, which is an adoption alliance. And we really got a sense of what it means to raise a black child in the United States, and actually raising a black child as white parents. We really were not up to speed entirely with what would be expected of us and what is necessary to keep a child safe and a integrated member of society. So we've spent a lot of time on unpacking what it means to be white and what it specifically means to be white in South Africa. I'm sorry, in America. So that's me, kind of in a nutshell. And in my relationship with my daughter, and our relationship in trying to figure out what this idea of whiteness is. And as Nico says, to be white is to be racist. It might be a sliding scale, but invariably you live and breathe and eat and consume racism. And I had no idea, quite frankly, again, to my shame, how racist a society America was. So we're kind of in the middle of that, yeah.
Louise? So we should say Louise and Nick, they're actually actors out in LA. So I hope that you guys are making money. But tell us, Louise, what are the challenges?
As Nick touched on, the choice to come here was it came from many. There were many different reasons. I mean, I think as actors and actors who had been working in international work in South Africa, there's always this thing of, well, could I be a big fish in a big pond? The personal need to to fulfill your potential, or at least to explore it, to ask the question, to put yourself, to take a leap and to be brave and see what happens. And perhaps we justified the choice for our daughter by saying it would allow her to escape from the pressures of a very racialized society as we had experienced South Africa. And it was naive. I think that we arrived in an America that was more divided than ever as a result of it having a Black president, and only became more so 8 months after we got here when 45 became the president. And what was interesting was that one of the reasons for me personally that I felt it was a good move to come to the States was that I was so aware of race in South Africa. I felt like it was getting to the point where my hypervigilance about race, about being a white woman and having a Black daughter and being hypersensitive to how people saw that, noticing the comments of friends who go, oh, you know, your daughter's so beautiful, and this kind of overcompensation that white people would get involved in to try and show their approval, to try and show that they're good white, you know. I felt that it was so oppressive, and then my own very unresolved feelings about being white resulted in this dreadful self-loathing that I felt there was no ways that could be positive for my daughter to try. And we always want to do better in terms of raising our children than we, you know, that we perhaps have identified the shortcomings of our parents were. And I wanted her to love herself, and I clearly wasn't loving myself. And I felt like moving to the States, we would remove her from that dynamic. Nope. Out of the frying pan and into the fire. But amazing, you know. We've, as Nick mentioned, we came very soon in contact with this group called PACT, and they're specifically about adopted children of color. So whether the parents who've adopted the children are Black or are white, the children are children of color, whether they are Black or Indigenous or some other person of color. This organization recognizes that there are very specific issues, and they gave us a framework from which to work, and kind of opened our eyes and started us on this incredible journey of coming to terms with our whiteness and really digging deep and leaning in to the prejudice that exists for BIPOC. So it's been amazing and humbling and hugely enlightening. And the journey is just, it's continuous. And I think specifically now, things have kind of ramped up for us. We were having a conversation just the other day where we said, you know, we came from this history, and I'll be completely transparent and say that there was a part of me that felt because I had a Black child, I was automatically absolved of my racism. You know, like, oh, well, she's like my not my virtue signaling, but she's my, you know, she's my, there we go. You see, I'm a good person. I'm a good white because I've got a Black child. And just that's not true.
Well, it's part of being racist.
And learning to embrace this idea that I am racist, and that doesn't make me a bad person. One of the incredible things lately is understanding how white supremacy is what the entire Western world's philosophy is based on. It's all about binaries. It's all about either or. It's about perfectionism. It's about individuality. It's about how much we've lost in buying into that system. We've lost community. We've lost a sense of prideness, about a pride or an ability to love other white people, because there is, as Nico said, there is this kind of woke Olympics, you know. White people immediately there's a competition about like who's the most woke, and you find that in all of these organizations. So there's just been like this ramp up of learning and awareness and and it's incredible. It's and encouraging. It's really encouraging and amazing to think that our daughter may have a world in which she really has a shot at being seen for who she is, not primarily for the color of her skin.
Thanks, Louise, and thanks for the honesty. I want to come now to my dearest, beautiful friend, Tia. Hello, Tia. Now, Tia, we're all from drama school, Uncle Ronnie and Madeline. Don't worry about us crazies right now, because Tia is supposed to be a white person, but I don't know. She told me something else the other day. Hello, Tia. Tell us about your experiences. Firstly, I said to her, Uncle Ronnie, she's Italian, but she might fail the pencil test. Tia, go for it, darling. Welcome.
Oh, it's very, thank you. It's very fascinating to listen to all of you. Actually, I don't really have anything to add, having been raised in a Italian immigrant household. My parents are Italian and they moved to South Africa in 1968, but they came from Eritrea. And for us living in a white neighborhood and going to white schools, it was quite a culture shock, because when my parents' friends would come from Eritrea, black people, suddenly there were black doctors and black, people that we would not ordinarily mix with in South Africa in my home. And it was, as a child, I always thought that was so weird that we, black people I used to see in the streets in our blue collar town of Orange Grove in the 70s and 80s was, were menial workers. And then suddenly, this black doctor would arrive, and this very glamorous black artist woman or whatever. So that was a bit weird. But I've never looked white, so I've got the opposite. Thing. I've just always looked mixed. So people have my whole life asked me who's black, my mother or my father. And I wasn't let into the movies in Johannesburg in the 80s and that kind of stuff. So so that was a bit weird. And since then I've done an ancestry.com kind of thing, and I found out Firdousa's husband's cousin from Nigeria and Benin, which is great. And I would love to really claim that, but I heard the other day something very fascinating of someone who has found out, that they have African ancestry. And I liked the way she put it. She said, I like to be a cousin to blackness. I don't claim it, for myself, because my experience in the world is my privilege and my whiteness, especially in South Africa. And I live in Europe. I've been in Italy for almost 20 years. And there hasn't been a problem with racism here at all until the last few years. And this is very, very worrying, that there's an insurgence of racism and right-wing and neo-Nazi and fascism. And we really, really have to be vigilant now, because it's rearing its ugly head. And I think people take their lead from leaders like Trump, like we have a guy here called Salvini, who's an extreme right politician, and everything he blames on migrant workers. Everything is, and people believe him. So we have to be very vigilant. And I'm very vocal about the buck stops here with, conversations. And if people say something racist, you have to stop them and say, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Just explain that to me. And if they try and explain it to you and you look at them like, what are you saying? Then they realize they're saying something wrong. I think to stop it and nip it in the bud every single time, never give somebody a pass,
is really what I'm doing, and I've landed up like not talking to family members. And but yeah, sorry, I'm carrying on, and I've really got nothing really important to say, but that's just my experience. So.
Thank you, Tia. I think it's important because obviously I'm Indian South African, and being a little bit fairer looking. I mean, the issue around race has always been in all of our lives, wherever you are. And Faith and I can get into an aircraft, and Faith being Nigerian and black, the air hostess will immediately say, you know, where are you going to? Because we're both walking towards business class. And he certainly can't be going into the business class cabin. And I begun to witness that much more often because of him, which I think is probably, Nick, what you and Louise will see because you have a black child. But otherwise, you are completely, you know, colorblind. It never occurs to you that this is happening because you yourself would never experience it. Nick, I'm really fascinated by your film, and I think, or the series of films, which I think would be very important also for Nick and Louise to have a look at. Because the other thing that you did, which was interesting, was to talk to children who were brought up by white parents, so children of color. And tell us about that process, because I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, well, we felt it was really important to hear from people who did not share our perspective in this series, right? So we met with, interviewed with, and visited with a lot of both adopted children of color and foster or former foster youth of color to hear their thoughts on really things macro and micro, right? The problems with the system, with the foster care system, the embedded racism and classism institutionalized, you know, since the beginning of the foster care system. And then also, you know, kind of what they deal in the day-to-day in their homes with their parents. And then on the flip side, we also spoke with a number of adoptive parents too. And interestingly enough, I'm very familiar with PACT and have been to the camp, and Angela Tucker, who does a lot of speaking to PACT parents, is in the series as the kind of transracial adoption expert, if you will. I mean, she very much is an expert. She's a transracial adoptee, so she's speaking from her own experience, but she's also works closely with a lot of adoptees professionally. So yeah, that was extremely important to us. You know, for a long time, we didn't even want to make the series because I was very familiar with the kind of canon of adoption films, and they're all white parents. And, you know, it's really problematic that that's the primary point of view we're getting in anything mainstream about adoption, you know, fiction or nonfiction. If you look at Instant Family or any of the recent films you could point to. And the kind of what we came to understand would work for us was making sure that we were able to bring in and include a lot of different voices and people who were not afraid to disagree with us on camera, and we show our kind of stumbling and learning throughout too. You know, even the very fact that really we shouldn't be using the term foster to adopt because they're two separate processes. You foster or you adopt. Sometimes people wind up doing both. So yeah, but the last thing I'll say about this series is that, you know, we showed a kind of serious clip, but it's mostly a comedy. So you should watch it for the comedy.
Well, I think we should all watch it, definitely. We'll share the link because I think it's really important. Uncle Ronnie and Madeline, because of your life's experiences, part of the conversation was, do you think that children can grow up differently? Do you think our parents or ourselves and these young parents have a responsibility in the way that we bring children up? And can we bring them up not being racist? Madeline.
You throw it to me first.
I start with you. And then I want Zoraida to tell me what she thinks.
You know, I think on one hand, upbringing is so critically important by, you know, your obviously your very close environment. But I also think the culture weighs heavily on you. And as much, you know, I always think about myself as much as I had this very, I think, very fortunate background. When I, during my college years, went to Mexico and started going to school there for a while, and I was stuck in a class, was in a class with Mexicans who had been part of the '68 revolution there, I was actually taken aback by the fact that they were so smart. Now, what is that led me to believe that I should be smarter, So I think these things really do, as I said, your culture weighs heavily on you. And I don't know. I mean, as I said, I think awareness is a very important step, but it's not enough, And I think the discussions that we're having here in the States are critically important, and they can go probably in a certain way, perhaps too dogmatically on one hand. That always seems to happen. But we don't know where it's going to lead. It's very transformational. I mean, how do we look at another person? And like you, Firdaus, I'm married to a Kenyan, right? And it's the same, I walk into a grocery store and he helps me and they think he's the help.
Yes. Zoraida.
One of the words that Louise used when she was describing the state that they're in at the moment and everything that's happening, she used the word encouraged. And I feel that there's so much with what's happening right now globally. I'm so encouraged by that as a parent, because I think that the days are gone of children of color being invisible. I think that there's a strong accountability taking place, particularly in schools. And I speak about my son goes to one school and my daughter to another, so they both go to two different schools. And diversity is a large, important part of their structure and foundation. So nothing gets, the little microaggressions that take place, particularly in the high school, they either get filmed or they get debated or they get spoken about or they get onto social media, which is something that we never had back in the day. My parents didn't have that. So there's a strong accountability that's taking place right now, which I appreciate and am encouraged by. And one of the things that Tia said as well, which is so important, is that we continue to be upstanders and not bystanders. So every time there's a moment for you to challenge racism, classism, gender, any form of otherness, the onus is on us to do that. And so I'm encouraged by our kids and their future.
Thank you. I've got a little clip to show before I come to you, Uncle Ronnie. Justine, do you have this clip for us?
I was the guest speaker. That night at dinner, I was at a table full of white people, and the guy, one of the bosses who'd invited me, actually started to tell a joke that I knew straight away was going to be racial. And black people were going to be the butt of the joke. In those split seconds, in the early sentences of the joke, I had a decision to make. Do I say something or stay quiet? No one else was saying anything, but I'm sure they felt uncomfortable. So I spoke up and I said, I don't think this joke is one I want to hear. I don't like the way it's going. I think it's going to be at the expense of black people. I'm not comfortable with that. Would you mind not telling it? Or I could leave the table. It was very uncomfortable. I remember he didn't tell the joke, but it was uncomfortable the rest of the night. Later in my room, I journaled what I felt about what was going on. I thought two things were at play. One was what I would call white solidarity. The other was what I would call white social capital. White solidarity is an unspoken code, I think, that we have as white people that means we would never embarrass each other by creating a racial discomfort for each other, by interrupting a racist joke or pointing out an act of prejudice or discrimination. We cannot keep quiet because it's a social code that we have, that we would remain in solidarity with each other, which protects our whiteness, our white advantage, our white privilege. That was at play at the table that night that allowed him to do what he'd done obviously many times. White social capital is what you get if you stay quiet. you get included, you are one of the boys, you are an insider, you are good to be around, you're a team player, you're fun, which may give you opportunities of inclusion as well in a corporate setting, a business setting, a social setting. It is an accruing of white capital by going along with it. I want to say to my white friends listening to this that our silence at those times is not benign, it is malignant, because we become complicit in the continuation of the racist joke telling. It gets told again and again because when we heard it, we didn't say anything. And as socially awkward as it is, and knowing you'll be penalized if you say something, I'm appealing to us, because millions of us every day have this opportunity to say something, to speak up, to stand up for people of color and black people. And you will be excluded and you will lose social capital, but you will be a champion of a cause that you wish someone had been for you at times in your life. And I think many of us feel we can't do anything at the large government level. We can't protest on the streets. We don't feel comfortable with this or that. Can you say something today, wherever you are in your life? Can you speak up? Because our silence is not benign. It is continuing the problem. We can all play a part like this every single day. Let's speak up. Let's play our part, is what I'm appealing for. Love you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Uncle Ronnie.
Well, I prefer to rather respond to your first question. And what the gent had to say is fine about standing up and speaking up. But I find it more interesting to respond to your question to me. What would I say to the folks here who are bringing up a black kid? My son, who you know, married a Nigerian woman, and they've got this gorgeous little granddaughter now that I have down the road. And she's going to come up against certain problems in South Africa for sure. I've seen it with the kids of friends of mine who also have a mixed race child in South African schools. But I would say, look, the essence for parents is the bringing up of a child. And it's complex, but what to keep in mind, I had to face this as kids growing up in exile. And it's not to tell them that they've got to become a member of the African National Congress or the Communist Party, or when they grow up, they've got to be an artist and they mustn't go into business. I mean, that's going to be their choices. It starts with you, your family. And the key thing, and I would say everybody here who we're talking to, you can see it, are giving their children, adopted or not, a value, an upbringing that's positive and good and decent. And what word would we choose for our kids to live by? Socialism, humanism, philosophy. I think we would want to say to our child, to our children, you know, you've got to be decent. You've got to care for people. You must stand up for justice. And you give them that bedrock and lots of other things for sure, if you can, to have the right ideas, the education, how to look for information, and how to know from that information what is distorted, what is genuine. They're going to be going through school, primary, they're going to be listening to various teachers, they're going to go into secondary school, universities, they're going to get into business world and earning a living. There are all sorts of things and choices. It starts with the basis that you can give your kid. And you've got to obviously hope for the best. You can't be absolutely certain how they're going to grow up, but give them that beginning. Now, I want to say that Madeline made a really good point about class and the system, the structure of society. That's an important, vital thing in talking now about identity politics, gender politics, color, race politics. And you can see in the United States, you can see in South Africa now, the color factor is used from the time of colonial conquest. That's when racism comes out of European conquistadors to justify the rule, the exploitation, the enslavement of people of color. That's when it comes. To get into that and to understand what racism serves, that becomes a very important element. And that's something that we all need to keep grappling with in our lives. I'm not ashamed of my color. I got this color through a biological process, through millennia of evolution, which gave me a lighter skin than a black African. You know, this is what we've got to explain to people. So there's that particular aspect from Madeline. I want to just include a favorite book of mine about color, written, Madeleine, in your home city, that beautiful city of New York. I'm sure you know a book called The Color of Water. Have you heard of a book called The Color of Water by a black guy, James McBride, whose mother was white and Jewish in origin and ran away from her rabbinical background in the South and married a black guy and had 8 kids. James is one of the youngest, and he wants to know about color. And she says to him, color's the color of water, my dear boy. The color of water. And wow, what a metaphor. How you get into that particular metaphor. It's a brilliant book. Read it. Has anybody apart from Madeleine, do you know the book? The others I'm talking to. You know it. It's fantastic.
Not for it.
So yeah, you know, identity politics it's very important, but it's not the end of the thing. It's not the end of the thing. You've got to get to embrace the power relationships and understand where the color factor, like the issue of being Semitic, of being a Jew in a wholly anti-Semitic Europe in the last century and the one before, what that was about. So, you know, it's an endless discussion. It's a discussion that we have to encourage people to have and to learn from each other. I keep learning all the time. I lived with black people in exile all the time. I came back into South Africa and I made this crucial error where 2 journalists came to me. I was working in the ANC office, had been unbanned, etc. 2 journalists came to me, a black guy and a white guy, to interview me. And my God, to my endless disgrace, I turned to the white guy thinking that he was the guy coming to interview me and that the black guy was going to photograph me. And it turned out the other way round. And I made that instinctive error. And of course, this is where we have to be sensitive. But I don't believe that we've got to wring our hands and hold our head in shame. The point is, as this wonderful woman, Sonia Taylor, points out, learn the different language, as has come out as well. in many ways tonight, including the gent who you've just shown speaking, it's in the end, it's not words. It's obviously how you live your life, but it's action that you take, because the action counts. And in acting and getting involved with other people, I'll go back to what I said about being in a camp in tropical Africa. After a while, the color disappears. It's the colored water. You're all the same. It really is. I've seen that working in life. When you're working for a common cause and a cause for justice. And that's how you bring up the kids. That's the way to bring up the new generation.
So I would like to just get, I would like you each to finish off with a thought. But before you do, just tell me what F is for to you. So we'll start with Nick and Louise. F is for?
You're muted, guys.
I think you're muted, yeah.
It was so good as well.
It was so good. We're not going to tell you again. Forward thinking.
Future.
Lovely.
Frankness.
Find more.
That's nice. Freedom and family.
Right,
Joshua, you are still so in love. Madeline.
Frankness. Honesty.
Frankness. Nico.
I'll stick with family too, the great human family.
Tia?
We've sung from the balconies throughout lockdown, so I'm going to have to say Figaro, 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 Figaro.
Great.
Josh, we're still trying to get Tia to sing for us, but she refuses to do that.
No, anytime. Beautiful voice.
Come on, Tia.
I just did. Thank you, everyone. It was very fascinating to listen to everybody, and I'm changing the subject.
Okay. I'm actually going to... I want to thank you all from all parts of this wonderful world of ours. I obviously we cannot, well, it's not a debate, because for us it's just a conversation around whiteness. I hope that it helped a little bit the people who are watching, but also for us amongst ourselves, because we are all really good friends. And sometimes we do look beyond color. You are right, Uncle Ronnie, but we also have instinctive, sometimes unfortunately, prejudices. And so whether we think that the black guy is actually, you know, just like you, Madeline, Faith is my driver. Everybody says he's my driver. So when I met my school friends, for example, you know, they were like, wow, you're doing really well. You have a driver. And that's supposed to be Faith, right? And I go, oh, him? No, he's actually, and I say this to them, I'm like, actually, no, he's the one with the money. He's the one, he's in charge. He's the boss. But it is unfortunate that this is what we're having to deal with. So I want to thank you all for your frankness, for your openness, and for being part of this conversation on the F Show. And we'll link you all so that you can share, especially the beautiful episodes from Nico. I think that's really important. So what are we going to do about COVID, Josh? In closing, I mean, the big issue was COVID. That's why we're here. It's like, what now?
Not my fault. Well, I tell you what, something did pop into my mind. A lot of people mentioned F as family. This is one of the most beautiful things about tonight was, you know, I'm engaging in a lot of conversations that are difficult with people, and some of them are people I was at school with and so on, that are not actually joining a conversation. Right now here we have a family friendship of people that are discussing and listening a great deal, supporting each other, joining a conversation, not shouting, not loud hailering only and then waiting for their turn to speak, and not, we're all participating in that way. So COVID perhaps has to weirdly, in a roundabout way, answer your question, has allowed a conversation to happen with a bit more space and a bit more time. And I found that to happen with myself personally, and I found that to happen with friends, and I certainly have found that to happen here tonight. Thank you.
I think part of the conversation was really, you know, even the F show is really because of COVID. Usually I'd be on a plane every 2 weeks in another city, in another country, in another part of the world. And what the F show has done was for me to bring all the people who I might have seen in other places actually online. And we were able to talk about, I think, what are important issues, but not in a heavy way. We're trying to make it light. We want people to engage. We want us to take the conversation beyond this online space. And I want to thank you, Josh, in particular, because I think it was important, you know, when you sowed the seed about the issue around whiteness, that we should bring it in here and have this conversation. Nick and Louise, thank you. I know it's really early out there, and Nico, so great. Thanks for being with us. Thank you, Madeline. It was lovely to see you again. Uncle Ronnie, as always, putting us right in place. Thank you. And Tia, I'm still disappointed that you haven't sung a song. So anyway, I say goodbye and lots of love. And thank you, Justine, for all your hard work. Mwah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.